On this project, I'm going to make a wooden mallet. This block of wood here came from the same pallet that I made my car cane with. This was a piece that I had cut off the end of that car cane, so it's pretty much the same thing. This is an old squeegee stick. I'll take a knife, scrape the paint off, and then I'll sand that down real good. This is what I use vinegar, soak my tools in it, take the rust off of them, and what I've done is I've filtered that with coffee filters so there's no gunk in it. This is some sawdust that's left over from the last time that I worked on the car cane, and I'll use that to fill these holes with. Now I'm not going to fill this hole right here because this is about dead center of where this handle will sit. So I'll just drill that hole out to be able to put the handle in there. But I will fill this hole right here with wood glue and sawdust. And then I'll let this set overnight before I stain this. And then I'll need to let this sit for a couple of days to get good and dry again. And then I'll sand everything down and go from there. I'll try to show you as much of my work as I go along as I can. And I'll be back to give you an update. Okay, my hole is filled. On the side that I'm going to fill the hole, I actually did this in 2 stages. I took this sawdust from the previous video that I have. I used the finer stuff on the bottom and I mixed it with wood glue. And I'll show you with the hole that I'm not going to fill on this piece. Basically, I took a Q-tip, broke the end of it off, and I stuffed it down in there. Then I allowed the first time for it to dry overnight, and then I went back the next day and I finished filling it, and I left a little heap on it. That way it'll completely fill it up. This is a block, my test block, where I am using my vinegar rust concoction, and I'm going to smooth this up, square the block, and then I'm going to soak this in this stain that I make. It's a homemade stain. And I'll show you as I stain it. And it'll make some pretty good colors, as you can tell. Of course, there was a crack in this where I cut it off the end of that car cane, as you can tell. I may have to let this dry a little bit longer than I let that dry. I let that dry for a couple of days. Of course, it's been dry for about a week now. And then I'll let this dry, and then we'll go from there. But I'll be back and show you how I stain this once I get it all cleaned up, smoothed a little bit more. It's not going to be the final smooth, but I'm going to dress it up a little bit, and I'll be back with an update. Okay, I'm evening up the block. Now I'm cutting that little nail hole that was on the side of this thing. I'm going to cut it off, and this end was just a little bit smaller than this end, so I'm going to straighten that up and even it up. That hole right there for the bottom, when I drill it out, will be about dead center. And I'm going to sand it real good, and I'll be back to show you me staining it. Okay, I have the block all squared, and I'm getting ready to stain it now. I've got it sanded down, but not perfectly. I'm going to do a final sand on it once this thing's stained and dried, and then I'll use that sawdust to put in the bottom hole after I make the big hole for the handle. The handle I've already scraped the paint off of. I have to cut it down yet and sand it, of course. But I'm going to go ahead and stain this, and I'm going to try to show you as I go along, if I can. I've already shook this up. Of course, I'm going to use all of it in here, but I'll put it back in. And it's got a strong vinegar odor, of course, because it is vinegar that cleaned rust off the tools. Basically, what I want to do is just soak it in there. And I do that for about 30 seconds or so on each side. And then I'll put it on the ends, and then I'll soak that for about a minute. and it ought to give it a good color. This is the end that come off that I cut the nail hole off of, and then once I got it squared away, that's a tray that I'm going to let this dry in. I'm probably going to let it dry for 3 to 4 days, because the little piece that I let dry, I think is going to take a little bit less. And as you can tell, there's the difference in the color already. Of course, I'll save this and put it back in my jar. But I'm going to soak the end grains very well, and then I'll do a final sanding once it all gets dried up. I'll drill my hole for my handle, which is a 7/8. Then I'll use the sawdust once I'm done to glue the handle into the hole. Basically, I don't really have a time clock on this. Basically, I let it come up on the sides pretty good, make sure it's very well absorbed. This is where the first nail hole was that I filled. And of course, I'll sand all that down once I get this dried up. I'm going to let the ends of this sit a little bit longer than I let the sides. I did end up doing a lot of sanding to this. Actually, I kind of rubbed the edge off my table, which table's no good anyway. But there's all the sawdust and stuff where I've kind of smoothed this up a little bit. I may have to soak this a little bit more just to make sure it gets in there real good on that edge, on this end. Sorry about that, my video turned off. Actually, my finger may have accidentally pushed the button as it's pretty sensitive. I'm going to soak that end a little bit longer, and then I'll soak this end here. But as you can tell, it'll give it a good color. Of course, the end grains is going to soak in a lot better than the block. And yes, I did get a little on my hands, but it's water soluble and it'll wash off. This is actually the tub that I use to clean my tools with, and you can tell the levels of vinegar I've had in there. I don't keep the lower part of the cleaning solution, but I keep the upper, and I filter it into a jar and save it the best I can. Want to make sure I got all of it fairly well. Shake off as much as I can. And then I'll leave it to dry. And I'll be back with another update once I get the hole drilled after it's dried. I allowed this to dry for a week, and I've already shaken my vinegar rust concoction that I use to put color with this block of wood. I've sanded it down real smooth, and it's got some white splotches in it, so I'm going to dip this again, but just momentarily. I'm not going to do it for as long as I did the last time, but it's all sanded down good. And the handle, I've cleaned it all up, sanded it, and also clipped the end off of it, so that will fit down in there nicely when I make my hole right in here. And I'll show you the second part of my staining that I'm going to make this. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to do it very long on each side, just enough to give it some color. And then I'll allow this to dry overnight. Make sure I get all the white splotches done. And then once this dries, I'll make my hole. And glue my handle in there. And I'll be back to show you that as I do it. Okay, I'm going to drill my hole. Just on the outside of this, I've got it marked. I have a 7/8 spade bit. I've made me a little stand. I'm going to try to show you when I mix the wood glue and sawdust, and then I'll put the wood glue and sawdust in the hole and also on the handle, and then I'll let it set up overnight. I don't think I can show you me drilling the hole, but I'm going to try my best to show you when I'm mixing the wood glue and sawdust and putting it together. Okay, I've got my hole drilled, and it's about where I marked it. And I used a 7/8 flat bit to make that hole. I made a little stand. I'm going to try to show you me mixing the wood glue and me putting the handle in it. I couldn't show you me drilling the hole. It's a little difficult to have this thing around and kind of hold it steady, but I basically done it down in there. And that plastic knife I'm going to use to mix up the wood glue and sawdust, and then I'm going to break it in half once the glue starts to dry a little bit and shave off the excess glue that comes out on the stick. But I'm going to pause this video for just a moment. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is put just a little bit of glue in the hole, just to make sure that there's glue down in the bottom of it where I need to. And I didn't save too much of the sawdust, but I saved the small pieces of sawdust. That way I can get a good fill. And then I'll basically mix it up and just kind of spoon it in there or knife it in there, however you want to call it. But this is just to give it a quick bond, because it'll dry a lot faster with the sawdust than it does normally. But that also means I don't have a long time to stick that handle in there. And I'm going to put a little bit on the stick as I go along too. That way we make sure we get it stuck in there real good. There shouldn't be too much runoff. You know, we're not going to pound this thing like a sledgehammer, so and I'll be back once it gets dry. Okay, the glue's dry. It's actually the next day. I let it dry overnight. Right now I'm going to put a couple coats of polyurethane on it. I did make it to where the head is slightly tilted a little bit. But the glue's all dry, and I cut off the excess like I said I was going to. And now I'll just coat it and be back to show you what the finished product looks like. You know, kind of like the old saying goes, watching paint dry. But my dog likes to come out here and sit with me. Don't you? And my son come out and fed the birds. This is the last coat, but it'll have to dry overnight. And there it is hanging up over there. I'm going to have to do the end of it once this coat dries. Well, my mallet's all finished. I have 2 coats of polyurethane on this. And that rust vinegar that I dipped the head in really made the colors turn out real good on it. All I did was scrape the paint off the handle and sanded it down, and I did not dip the handle because I wanted to a two-colored mallet, but it really made some nice colors in there. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.